Are we with you again, dear ones? We want to thank you all for coming to this particular meeting. We have indeed missed these gatherings, but there are times and places where other projects have to take place. So that's what was going on. We want you to understand that urbanization has been one of the long-term strategies of the governments and those beings that we will say have 50 steps planned for you. They do not have 2 steps. They do not have 3 steps or 10 steps. They have 50 steps planned for you. And one of those plans was urbanization, getting you away from nature, getting you away from your ability to produce your own food, getting you away from community. Notice how the cities are built, little tiny apartments, one on top of the other, people not knowing each other. Inside all the time, very little green space. If you think about frequencies, the way to lower frequencies is to do all of those things. And the way to bring lower frequency teachings into a mind is to lower the frequency of the mind first, so that it's a match. If you are out in your garden and you've got lovely neighbors and you've got some chickens and you're living a life and you don't compromise yourself, you've managed to find a way of making a living that suits you, and you might be doing 2 or 3 different things, and you go to the farmer's market and you get your food and you know the farmer, and on and on and on. If you're living a high vibe life like that, and someone brings in a low frequency idea, you will simply reject it out of hand. You will say, that doesn't fit into my life. It makes no sense, because you're up here and the fearful idea is down here. But if you have brought people into isolation, if you have taken people out of nature, if you have managed to get a TV in every room in their house over generations, what you have is a very, very domesticated population that is very, very easy to manipulate and very, very easy to frighten. All you have to do is stop food going to a store for 24 hours and they will panic, because they don't have any other resources to call upon. Dependence has become a way of life. And so the urbanization and industrialization of your society, which when you think about it, has not been happening for very long, the dependence on money instead of bartering and trading, it has not been very long that has been underway. So these huge conglomerations of people that you call cities are fine as long as the systems that bring all the food in and take all the poop and urine away and the garbage away, as long as those systems are functioning, and it is quite miraculous to see how those systems function, then the city seems a pretty nice place. There's a nice Chinese restaurant on the corner, there's a show on Saturday night, and you think, oh, I'm cool, I live in the city. But what is happening now? The cities are becoming places where lockdowns can happen and are easily enforced, because you are in a high-rise building. What do you have to do to corral somebody in a high-rise building? You lock the front door. That's all you have to do. If you have 1,000 people in a high-rise building, one door does it. If you have 1,000 people in the country, it's a different story. They've got guns because they go hunting. They've got big dogs to protect their property. You are not as manageable. So what we would like you to do is, rather than pretend that you don't know what looks like is coming, but to use your intelligence and go, oh, I can see, we've already been shown how easy it is to shut a city down. It is not so easy. Our dear one, when there were lockdowns, was walking her dog in the country. There was no police around. There's too many rural properties. This is one of the reasons, is that you cannot be policed. The policing system that has been invented for your society right now requires everybody to be in the same place. It requires you to be gathered together in very, very easily monitored situations. Now, the biggest issue that you are coming up against, and all of you will come up against this, is the financial system, because you cannot function, for example, without having a bank account. What we are asking everyone to do is to, when you have made that decision that you are going to go somewhere where there are more community-minded people, go somewhere where there are more opportunities for food being grown close to where you are, these supply chain issues that you are seeing are giving you a warning. They're showing you that the peaches that are canned and grown in New Zealand that you buy in England, they're not going to make it anymore. They're not going to get to you anymore. This is going to be an increasing problem. So for those of you that have your heels dug in and say, I don't want to move, I don't want to go somewhere, that is your choice. It is your choice. But we want you to look at the writing on the wall. We want you to look at what is happening and what is escalating. It's not getting better, it's getting more and more intense. And as the governments of the world play their cards, you are seeing what their plans are. Now, what we want you to understand is that the creative potential that you have is extreme. And many of you have had feelings of moving somewhere, but a spouse doesn't want to move, or the children don't want to change schools. And one of the great benefits, of course, of these lockdowns over the last couple of years in schools is that many of you have pulled your children out of school and you have broken that tie to the location. And so now you say, oh, well, no, I'm going to homeschool. And if I homeschool, that means, well, we could really live anywhere. So we want you to not see these things as depressing and fearful. We want you to see these things as opportunities. We want you to see these things as opportunities. There are beings over the last couple of years who have stopped going to their place of work and are now working remotely. And this gives them the opportunity to potentially move from close to work to somewhere that is less urban. And all of your fears will come up, and all of your ego's justifications for it not happening will come up. I love my neighbors. My mum lives up the street. I've got my garden just the way I want it. But you have to look at the actual things that are going on in the world. And we want you to understand that the changes that this planet is going through are massive, and they have just begun. They are massive and they have just begun. And when all is said and done, there will be a higher frequency planet and a higher frequency population once the shifts and changes have been undergone. But the road is rocky right now. And what we say to you is look at your assets, look at your skills, look at where you're living, and ask yourself, is this the optimum place to weather some difficulty getting food? Is this the optimum place for me to deal with a government that potentially may lock me down again? Is this the best place? Or is there another option? Perhaps there's an idea from the past where you used to think, oh, I used to think I'd like to live there. Maybe, just maybe, that idea is in your blueprint. Maybe that idea came to you for a reason. Maybe there's a dream that you've had of living in a particular way. And right now it's starting to look pretty good that maybe, just maybe, it's time to start asking questions and investigating. One of the things that we want to bring to your mind right now is the property values of cities. Some cities that are having increasing crime and increasing homelessness and increasing numbers of people leaving are seeing prices go down. It could be that the property you own in the city right now is at its top dollar. And it may be the time to cash in your chips and invest that somewhere rural where that money will go a lot further. Because as these difficulties and changes continue, there will be a drop in urban home prices. It is not a bubble that's going to last forever. This is something for you to think about. So that is what we want you to understand, is that the gathering together of people in large cities was in preparation for these global programs so that you would be more manageable. That is our answer. Well, I have to say, I mean, it's very interesting that I have 3.2 acres that I bought 2 years ago, and it was an absolute disaster. And after 2 years of full-time work with a crew and spending a lot of time and seeing what's happening now 2 years down the line. So 2 years ago, it was COVID, but now it's supply chain issues. I've got a lot of potatoes in that garden now. I've got a lot of, I'm putting food in there now. And 2 years ago, that wasn't necessarily a priority for me. I'm like, oh, it's nice to have some land. That's great. But, my point of view is changing. And even my children, so my son, Kieran, for example, who's renting a house, the rents are going up and up and up. We're talking about now building him a place on my property so that he has a home. And then that money can go into servicing this property rather than going to somebody else. Sure. That's not something he would have thought of 2 years ago. He wouldn't have thought that, but he's looking at the writing on the wall. He's looking at what's happening, and he's seeing that collaboration is a much better idea than isolation, which is what the urban environment is basically. It's a bunch of people together. And I know when I left Victoria, when Ananda told me to come back here to Salt Spring, I kind of assessed what I was doing. And I was like, well, I have my favorite coffee shop. I have my grocery store. I had this. And I was like, you know what? If I look at the buildings and the things I do, I'm actually living in a village. I would do those same things in a small town or a village. And yet I'm surrounded by all these people and buildings that make me feel as if it's more interesting. But in actual fact, you could pretty much take the pattern that I was doing in the city and put it into Salt Spring. And my life isn't that different. But I've got more space, I've got more land, I'm surrounded by farmers. I'm surrounded by people who have land and are growing and talking about. There is actually a communal program on Salt Spring where they're asking everybody to plant more root crops so that we can put them in a community food bank, so that if there are food shortages, because most people grow what they need, they don't grow more than what they need, right? So this is something that's coming up, and I'm like, this is actually a good place to weather some, notwithstanding the Canadian government. We'll see how that goes.
That's just a minor detail.
I think the Canadian government's got more trouble than they think. There's a lot of freedom fighters. There's a lot of people. My son lives up in Courtenay, and he said every single pickup truck has a Canadian flag on it.
Really?
And that's the sign now. That's the sign for freedom now, is a Canadian flag.
Wow.
Which is wonderful, actually.
Very cool.
Yeah. Let's do one more quick question.
Okay.